Hi, this is Nick Wykowski, and this is the third part of a four-part video series about programming an Air native extension with Flash Builder and Eclipse. So what we've covered so far is actually setting up the environment, creating the DLL file that will essentially be our native extension or the native portion of our code. Now we're actually going to be dealing with creating the actual library file, the ActionScript code that translates the native code side, the DLL, into something that our application can actually use. So the basic steps we're going to be covering include creating a new library that will become the AS3 portion of our A&E. We're going to create a new A&E descriptor file. We're going to write the AS3 code, so we're going to write, I think, like 3 or 4 functions in addition to the standard ones. And then we're going to compile the different components into an actual .ANE file that we can consume later on. The last part of the video series will actually show you how to consume that ANE file in your application and do some tests, so essentially writing like a little harness or something like that so you can test your DLL file. So let's get started. Start back up Flash Builder over here, and where we left off last time is we have a C file and a header file. We have taken these files and we've done a release build to create our .dll. The .dll file is lib_sample_ane.dll, and of course that is stored in the release folder of the C++ or C application folder that we started earlier. So we're going to switch over to the Flash perspective and we're going to go create a new library. So we're going to go in the Package Explorer, right click, New, Flex Library Project. And click, and we're going to give our library name. So I'm going to say sample ane lib. Just going to store it in this default location. It's going to be just a generic library. You can choose whatever Flex SDK that you wish. You need to make sure that you include the Adobe Air libraries within your library. Without this will not work. Hit next. It's going to ask about the build paths, and really I'm not going to worry about these too much here. If I had other dependencies that I had to worry about, other SWIC files and things like that, this is where I would add them right now. But this isn't the case for this particular project, so I'm going to hit Finish. In a few moments you should see the Flex SDK create your library. There we go. So what we have right now is, again, just a basic library, and you'll notice that right away the bin directory is created with essentially an empty SWIC file. Now, there's no compilation pretty much happens in the background for these SWIC files. We won't have to worry about doing release builds or anything like that with SWICs. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a package that we're actually going to store. We're actually going to create 2 packages. One that we're going to store our ActionScript code, and then the other we're going to store just some miscellaneous assets that we have as well, in particular our descriptor file. So I'm going to go create a new package. I'm going to store this in the com.q2.samples.anesample folder, or essentially package, and hit Finish. I'm also going to create a second one here that is going to be com.q2.samples.assets. So I should now have an A&E folder, an A&E samples folder, and an assets folder. So quickly we're going to go create a new class, and we're going to extend the event dispatcher. So new ActionScript class. And I'm going to name this A&E sample. This is essentially the package, or this is the package that you will be calling in later on. So you may say, hello world A&E, or really however you want to address this in your applications later on. We're going to continue to use sample A&E, and we're going to want to make sure that we extend the event dispatcher. So under superclass, hit browse, and we're going to go and double click on event dispatcher. A&Es typically will extend from the event dispatcher, primarily so that later on you can actually dispatch events if your A&E takes care of that. I don't believe it has to dispatch the event dispatch or be a child of the event dispatcher, but it is recommended in all the documentation. In all honesty, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't. So we're going to hit finish. And this is going to create our stub AS3 file. But before we get too far with this, we will want to create our descriptor file. Now, a descriptor file is very similar to, let's say, like the error descriptor file that gives a couple of properties about the application, or in our case, the A&E, and it will help us link the DLL file from the ActionScript side to the native code side. So in this assets folder, I'm going to create a new XML document. So it's going to be a generic file named descriptor.xml, and hit finish. Make sure again that's in your assets folder. This file isn't actually required to be within this library at all. However, for the A&Es that I've created, I like to include it in there. That way it's in my source repository if I'm using some sort of source control. And it exists within this project, so it's easy to find. Otherwise, they're just going to randomly sit on your hard drive somewhere where you may not be able to find them. So you'll want to find on the web a copy of like the default descriptor file, or a sample somewhere else. So I've already got one preloaded here. I'm going to copy and paste this into this XML document. So the descriptor file, very similar to, like I said, like your error descriptor file. You're going to have a couple different properties. It is a valid XML document and could possibly have multiple nodes. So the first thing you're going to want to have is your ID file, or your ID for the actual A&E. This is, again, how you would interact with the A&E. This has to be unique throughout the entire world of A&Es. So in my case, I'm going to do com.q2.samples.sample A&E. If you'll notice that this is like my domain name backwards, or is similar to how we would do error IDs. Version number should be a 3 component set, or 3 octets of a number. So in my case, I'm going to say 1.0.0. I believe version number needs to be in this particular format. You can try a different way if you would like to. Then we get down and we have a platforms node, and then we have specific platforms. A particular SWIC file can support multiple platforms if you wish. The example that we're doing right now only supports Windows, so we're only going to have the one platform in there. One thing to note, if you're ever working with mobile or platforms, so if you want to support multiple platforms, you want to particularly support multiple platforms with the emulator, you need to create a stub for Windows and Macintosh, depending on which emulators you want to support. So you need to have multiple platforms in there, particularly if you're doing mobile application, if you want to do any type of debugging of your application without having to run it always on a mobile application or a mobile phone. Mobile device, how about that? So the platform that we are going to be targeting for this sample is going to be Windows x86. I do believe that is case sensitive, so make sure you have the W in there. The native library that you're going to be using is the name of the DLL file. So in our case, it is libsampleane.dll, which again matches our sample A&E release version. So libsampleane.dll. These file names need to be the same. The initializer is the public interface, or the name of the function that we described in the public interface to our initializer function. So if we go back to our header file and we take a look at our initializer, we have the function name of initializer. So I like to keep those the same, and that's the snippets that I have, pretty much set this up exactly the same every time. If you take a look at our C code that we had, again, our initializer, and then we had our finalizer. So our initializer is going to be initializer, and our finalizer is going to be finalizer. I get in the habit of copying and pasting in case I misspelled something somewhere along the way. So we're going to save that, and that's pretty much all we would have to do. Again, if we wanted to do, let's say, another platform for the Mac OS or something like that, that again would be like Mac OS, and then we would provide the .library file, or really whatever else, however else we would have things set up. But again, in our case, we just have just the one platform that we're supporting. So great. So now we have our descriptor file. So let's get into the actual coding. So in order for things to work, there's a couple different components that we have to do. First thing, we're going to have to set up a private variable or some sort of variable essentially to hold our extension context. So in my case, I'm going to set up a private variable, extension context equals, and that's going to be of type extension context. So we have a private variable that's essentially going to be keeping track of our actual extension. So you'll notice that we aren't necessarily dealing with the extension itself, but rather the extension context. In just a moment here, that should make some sense. So and then we have our public function. This is our constructor, and this is where we are going to have we're actually going to set up the link between ActionScript and the DLL. So we're going to initialize this extension context. So equals extension context dot create extension context. This is where we pass in the ID of the extension that we wish to create. Again, this ID is referenced in our descriptor file, and in our case, again, is going to be com.q2.samples.sampleane. So I'm going to go copy and paste that. The next thing we're going to pass in is our context. For right now, I'm going to pass that in as null. So in one DLL, you can have multiple contexts. So think as a context is another, so one DLL file can have essentially multiple functions. So one DLL file that you create, for example, for like an address book function, can have things like the actual contact list. It can have an actual contact. It could have maybe a link to a dialer or something like that. That could all be created within one DLL file or one ANE. Now each context, when you want to create this in memory, let's say you have a address book and then something that deals with something that deals with address book, the address book itself, and then with context, or contacts I should say. You can pass in, let's say, the name contacts, and then within your C++ application, you actually get a reference back to the context type. So I could, by all rights, in my C++ application say, if CTX type equals contact, then do something. That's not necessarily what I'm doing here. This is a single-use ANE. But this is definitely one way that you could proceed with that. Because it is a single-use ANE for right now, I'm just going to pass in null because I'm not even checking for it. We have now created the link between the ActionScript world and this DLL. Nothing else. Well, there's one other thing that we have to do. The other function that we must have, and it must be public, is a dispose function. So the dispose function, all that pretty much does is it will manually dispose of this extension context. Dispose. So these are the two required functions, again, a constructor and essentially what becomes a destructor. The dispose will dispose of that DLL in memory. So remember, if we take a look at our C++ code, we really aren't doing anything because, again, that dispose function just takes care of, where is it at? The dispose function, all it pretty much does is it will then call the finalizer, well, first call the context finalizer, and then as it's destroying the DLL in memory, it'll call the finalizer. Right now, I don't actually do anything in those. If I, let's say, had some files open, if I had some TCP sockets that I need to clean up before I want to destroy the DLL or destroy that context, I could actually call that dispose. So those are my two required functions. Now the other things that I want to do as well is I want to actually implement the functions I created in my C application or my C DLL. So what I do for this is we have three functions that we dealt with or that we created. One was a is supported, another is get hello world, and another one is get test string. Again, we created the different functions here. Is supported should return back 1, which equals true. Get test string should return the string, this is a test string from A&E, and get hello world will say hello world, this is your DLL talking. So let's go implement those. I'm going to do new public function that says is supported, and I'm going to be passing back a boolean. So pretty much all I'm going to do is I'm going to reach into this DLL, call the function, and then take its return, and pass back its return essentially. So I'm going to say return my extension context dot call, and this allows me to call a function name. This string must match the string that we mapped over here. It does not necessarily need to match the actual function name in your C or C++ application. So I have this as is supported. And that is pretty much all I need to do. Essentially, the is supported when it returns. So when I say call is supported, the A&E infrastructure, so the Flash player infrastructure, is going to look up is supported. It knows from the context initializer that that points to this particular function. This function will then run, and it's going to return a result. The result is of type boolean, as we see right here, because that's how we casted it. It goes back into ActionScript, and then I then return that to my master application. I'm going to go quickly implement the other two functions exactly the same way. The get hello world and get text string. So another public function, get test string, and return a type string. And I'm going to do the same thing for the other function. Very similarly, I'm going to return my extension context.call. I'm going to go just copy and paste those because that is easier. Now, by all rights, I could be passing in data as well. I would be passing in, let's say, an array of parameters or just parameters in general. Those will be casted as an array when I pick those up in C, in my C application or my C DLL. I want to cast that as a string, if I can type right. Same thing over here. And this was a get hello world. And that should be all that's required for my A&E as far as the ActionScript code. So you'll notice that as I'm saving each one of these times here, my SWIC file is actually being compiled. Again, I don't need to do a release build of the SWIC or anything like that. So from here, I now have my descriptor file, I've got my SWIC file, and I have pretty much everything I need in order to create that DLL, or to create that A&E file. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new folder on my desktop to kind of put all these different resources that I need in order to actually create the A&E, just to make things a little bit easier for me. So I'm going to go minimize Eclipse and close this right now. I'm going to create a new folder. This is going to be sample A&E. Folder name, of course, doesn't matter. It's just sitting on my desktop. And I'm going to copy just a couple components to it. I'm first going to copy that descriptor file. So I'm going to go find that in the assets folder. Right-click, I'm going to go to copy. In the sample A&E folder, I'm going to go right-click, go to paste. And that'll put my descriptor file there. I'm going to copy that SWIC file. Again, right-click, go to copy, and paste it in here. And then I'm going to copy the DLL file. So the DLL, again, was in my C application, or my C project. Make sure you grab the release one. So now I've got 3 different files, and these are pretty much the 3 files that I need in order to create my A&E. Now, one of the requirements of compiling your A&E file is you need to get what's known as the library.swf file, and that is a component of the SWIC. So you have 2 options. Well, pretty much you have 1 option, I should say. You need to extract that from your SWIC file. Now, SWIC file, if you've never dealt with one before, is pretty much a zip file. Actually, it's exactly a zip file with a couple different files within it. This zip file includes that library.swf file that we need. So 2 ways you can go around this. One is you can either make a copy of this file. So if I right-click, go to copy, right-click, go to paste, rename this to be a .zip file. And then I can just open this up in WinZip, or I use WinRAR, or 7-zip, or whatever file that you may have. And you'll see the different components in here. The other thing that the method that I actually like to do is you right-click on the SWIC file, and then you open it with whatever application that you use to extract zip files. I, of course, again use WinRAR, and then I can go and drag and drop the SWIC file, or SWF file, to this directory, ending up with 4 files that I need. So now here is where we get into the command line. This, of course, to actually compile the A&E file. This, of course, could be automated using a Ant script or things like that. I actually have some of those. They're publicly available and things like that. But showing them on a command line makes a lot more sense other than just right-clicking and making things run. So I'm going to just have my command prompt open. I'm going to change directories into there. And I'm going to execute the ADT command. Now, ADT, I actually have that in my environment, so my Windows path. You can add the ADT file to your Windows path, just like you did on the GCC application. All you need to do is find the adt.exe file. It should be located in your Flash Builder directory. From Flash Builder, you're going to go into the SDKs folder, the SDK version, and then the bin folder. And that should have ADT. So from ADT, I'm going to execute a long command. So we're going to say ADT -package -target A&E. That's what we're going to be targeting. We're going to have the file name that we want to save this as. So we're going to say sample A&E.A&E. And then we need to pass in the descriptor file. So descriptor.xml. We're going to say we need to pass in the SWIC file. So SWIC or -SWIC, and then we're going to say sample A&E.SWIC. and we have to declare what type of platform and what files we need in that platform. Platform Windows x86, and then we're going to compile in that library.swift file, and then our DLL, which is libsample.dll. libsample.ane.dll. And when I hit enter, I shouldn't get any errors. Oh, I forgot one thing. You do need to update your library file, and we'll do that right now, so that the Swift version has to be greater than or equal to 13. To do that, you go back into Flash Builder, right-click on your project, go to Properties, you go to the Flex Library Compiler, and under Additional Compiler Arguments, you say -swf -version 13, then hit Apply. Should just take a second, and you should get a new SWIC file out of this. Again, you're going to want to copy this back into this folder. We're going to overwrite it, and then we need to re-extract that SWIFT file. And we're going to go replace that. We can then close our zip file, and we can go run this command again. And now we have our ANE file. So the next video we're going to be showing how to actually use that ANE. Very quickly I'm going to show that command that you need in order to, as a refresher, because the command is fairly complicated. So again, it's adt-package-target space ANE, the output file name of the ANE that you want. So in our case it was sample or ANE-sample.ane space descriptor.xml, or whatever you named your descriptor file as, -swic, the actual library file name, so sample ane.library.swc. Make sure that SWIC file is a version 13 or higher. Then you're going to do space-platform space Windows-x86 space the library.swift file space whatever DLL that you created. If you are creating an ANE that has multiple platforms on it, for example Mac OS or Android or iOS or something like that, you can continue to add additional platforms by, after your DLL file, by saying -platform, let's say iOS or something like that, and then you can do the Swift file to that library for the library for that particular platform, space the Xcode file or the library file or things like that. So again, in the fourth video we're going to be showing how to actually consume this ANE and use it within your application in both the Flash player and the full release application, and also a testing environment as well. Again, I'm Nick Kwiatkowski, and I hope you enjoy this video. I'll be seeing you in the next video.